What's up, everyone? Azariel here, and welcome to another Yu-Gi-Oh 101 Retro Modernization, where we take a look back at archetypes that were deemed unplayable or difficult to use due to the fact that people can't be creative enough and come up with new deck concepts these days. You know, not to toot my own horn, but toot toot. I kind of took the initiative to try to go back and, you know, bring those past archetypes and builds into the new era in Yu-Gi-Oh and try to make them playable. Not tournament worthy, but make them playable to where they can be enjoyable just in case somebody wants to try something different, things like that, you know. And also to showcase that when you put your mind to it, you can do anything and you can make anything in Yu-Gi-Oh. It just takes patience. You know, this isn't something that you're going to be able to fix, you know, in one day. Like, you're not going to be able to build a deck like that in one day without looking at some online profile. It takes time to build a deck in a certain way that you want to build it in. You know, granted that you're trying to do it completely custom, which are what all my builds are. They're completely 100% custom made. I didn't look at any, you know, online profile beforehand. This is just my own thoughts that go into this, my research, my own ideas, and my own concepts to try to bring these past archetypes and builds into today's era in Yu-Gi-Oh! And in today's episode of Retro Modernization, we're going to be taking a look at the Dark Scorpions. Now, the Dark Scorpions come from, again, like the earlier days in Yu-Gi-Oh! And the original strategies that were used back then from what I can remember, were basically because the Dark Scorpion monsters, they relatively have like low attacks. Now, as you can see right here, like Dark Scorpion Burglars, they have 1,000 attack. Don Zulong has 1,400. Miss Thorn, she has 1,000. You have Gore, which is 1,800, which isn't bad, but it's a level 5 monster, so that's kind of bad for a level 5. They have Cliff the Trap Remover, which is 1,200, and Chick the Yellow, 1,000. So the strategies that was based around the Dark Scorpion monsters was to either raise their attack up or lower the opponent's attacking monster's attack so that when they get destroyed, the effects of the Dark Scorpions that have effects that activate when they destroy an opponent's monster by battle or inflict battle damage. um, these effects would activate. Now, normally they would involve either searching for another Dark Scorpion or either milling cards from your opponent deck, or, you know, like removing trap cards or things like that. They would be like a sneaky, you know, archetype, kinda. And so the whole idea was to utilize spells and traps to try to weaken your opponent's monsters, because, or at least for this strategy that I put in this build, because I felt that lowering your opponent's spells and trap, lowering your opponent's monster's attack was more effective than raising the attacks of the Dark Scorpions. I decided to go with that instead. And as usual, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys the rundown of all the cards in the main deck and in the side deck. and I'm going to explain why there's no monsters in the extra deck as the video goes on. So first up, we have 3 Chick the Yellow. We have 3 Cliff the Trap Remover. We have 2 Gorg the Strong, 3 Mineta Thorn, 3 Dark Scorpion Burglars, 3 Don Zulong, 2 Legacy Hunter, 1 Allure of Darkness, 3 Dark World Shackle, 1 Dimensional Fisher, 1 Mustering of the Dark Scorpions, 2 Mystical Space Typhoon, 1 Reinforcement of the Army, 3 Shrink, 3 Howling Battle Guard, 3 Battle Guard Howling, 2 Escape from the Dark Dimension, 3 Fairy Box, and 1 Macro Cosmos. And in the extra deck, I have another Legacy Hunter, another Mustering of the Dark Scorpions, 3 Secret Paths to the Treasures, 3 Battle Guard Rage, another Escape from the Dark Dimension, 1 Malevolent Catastrophe, and Now, retro modernization is all about taking the original strategies and bringing them into the new era or the current era of Yu-Gi-Oh and updating them with the cards that they have in the game today. And on top of that, you, as I've mentioned in past videos and what have you, you have to make sure that you add in several other strategies besides your primary objective. Your primary strategy may be this, but make sure you add like one or two other strategies on top of that, so that way if the first one doesn't, you know, if you're not able to get off that primary strategy, then at least you'll have these other strategies to fall back on. Or at least that's how I make my builds. Now the original strategy for the Dark Scorpions, again, were to either raise the attack of the Dark Scorpions themselves when they attack, or to lower your opponent's monster's attack so that when the Dark Scorpions either get attacked or when they attack, they can inflict battle damage to your opponent and their effects will activate. And pretty much just to give you a rundown for those that never seen the Dark Scorpions before, with Chick the Yellow, when it inflicts battle damage to your opponent, it can either target one card on the field and return that target to the hand, or look at the top card in their deck and then return it to the bottom, and then return it to the bottom of the deck. Now this could be good for multiple reasons. You know, it could be one problematic card on the field that, you know, that can't be destroyed by battle or by card effect, or, you know, situations like that, and Chick the Yellow can just bounce them back to the hand, or even back to the extra deck, in which case that the monster can't go to the hand. It gets bounced back to the extra deck. And also, there could be a top card, or there could be a card on the top of your opponent's deck that your opponent may be looking forward to drawing their next turn, but you get an early look at it, and depending on, you know, how good it is, or if you can foresee it being a problem in the upcoming turn, you can just put it at the bottom of the deck. Now the deck does not get shuffled. The deck does not get shuffled because, and this is one of the mistakes that like the newcomers make. They think that the deck gets shuffled just because the card gets returned. If the card states that it goes to a certain place, like the top or the bottom of the deck, then the deck does not get shuffled. Otherwise, it would pretty much just defeat the purpose of the card text telling you where to put it. Now, if it would have just said just like the card goes back into the deck, then that card gets shuffled. But because it states a specific place where it's supposed to go, the card doesn't get shuffled. It goes to the bottom of the deck, and now your opponent has to, you know, or at least in an ideal situation, of course, have to sit there and pretty much wait till the end of the duel to pretty much draw the card again. You know, so considering that would be the last card at the deck that they would be able to draw. So that's where Chick the Yellow comes in handy. Now, Cliff the Trap Remover actually has a funny backstory. In the earlier days of Yu-Gi-Oh, Cliff the Trap Remover did not have Dark Scorpion in its name, but it was still considered to be a Dark Scorpion monster. So, like during the time when they started doing reprints, they actually had to include Dark Scorpion in Cliff the Trap Remover's name, because during duels people would get confused and there would be arguments back and forth whether or not Cliff was actually a Dark Scorpion and whether it could be, you know, saying like searched out with the Dark Scorpion support cards and things like that. So, you know, saying like that's a little bit of history for you for Cliff the Trap Remover. You know, like that was like a weird time in Yu-Gi-Oh. But anyway, when Cliff the Trap Remover, or like what Cliff the Trap Remover does when it inflicts battle damage to your opponent, is that you can target one spell and trap card on the field, and you can destroy it, or you can send the top two cards of your opponent's deck to the graveyard. Now, this is an MST, as well as it can mill, you know, two cards from your opponent's deck. You know, So whichever one you feel you may need the most of at the time, Cliff the Trap Remover just comes in handy, you know what I'm saying, like by default. So there you go. Now, Gorg the Strong. Now this is, I would say, one of the more difficult Dark Scorpions to use. Not because it's oh so difficult to get on the field, but more so of the fact that it's a level 5 monster and, you know, it takes one tribute. You know, it takes one tribute, and then for that tribute, like you only get a monster with 1800 attack, which isn't bad for a level 4 monster, but for a monster that you have to tribute summon, it's pretty ridiculous. So, but it still has some useful effects. So, when this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can target one monster your opponent controls and return that to the top of the deck, or you can send the top card of their deck to the graveyard. So, again, we have some bouncing going on, as well as some milling. Now, Thorn, when she inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can add one Dark Scorpion from your deck to your hand, or you can target one Dark Scorpion in your graveyard and you can add that to your hand. So this is basically your searcher. Now the only problem with Thorn is that um, it cannot search out Don Zulong because Don Zulong doesn't have Dark Scorpion in his name. And again, this is basically like the same problem that was with, you know, something like Cliff the Trap Remover back in the day. It's like it's a Dark Scorpion, but because it doesn't have Dark Scorpion in its name, you know, like there's some confusion there. But the difference between Cliff the Trap Remover and Don Zulong is that Don Zulong was intentionally made like come on, stupid. This always happens. I really should expect this by now. But yeah, Don Zulong was intentionally made this way because it wasn't supposed to get searched out. Because this is actually one of the better monsters in the archetype, and you're going to see why in a bit when I get to him. But Thorn searches out and recycles all of your Dark Scorpion monsters. So this is pretty helpful. Uh, and now Dark Scorpion Burglars is basically all of the Dark Scorpions in one card. And it it's pretty much like the weakest one out of the archetype. So on top of the fact that each individual monster has their own card, they actually made a monster card that has all of them in one, you know, card artwork. So it's weird. But yeah, when this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent has to send one spell card from their deck to the graveyard. So this is a good way to get rid of your opponent's spell cards. And a Don Zulong, the cream of the crop, quote unquote. When this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can discard one random card from your opponent's hand, or you can send the top two cards of their deck to the graveyard. Now, why the hell did I say that this was like one of the better cards in the archetype? I have no fucking clue. I was getting ahead of myself. Stupid me. But yeah, last but not least, we have Legacy Hunter. Now, Legacy Hunter is in here because, in theory, quote unquote, I'm like the backstory of Legacy the Hunter. Of Legacy Hunter is that this was Don Zulong way before he became a Dark Scorpion. So I kind of just threw him in there, but I only added two, considering that it's not a dark monster. You know, it wouldn't work with the other strategies I have in there, but it still has similar effects to the Dark Scorpion. So I felt it was good to add in there. And what happens when this card attacks a face down defense position monster and destroys it and sends it to the graveyard as a result of battle, your opponent returns one random card from their hand to the deck, and then their deck is shuffled. So I know what some of you may be thinking, you know, in an actual duel, how would your opponent randomly pick one card from their hand to deck? Either they can put all the cards face down and like just try to all the cards in their hand face down and uh, shuffle those cards up, or what can happen is you can pick the card from your opponent's hand, and then you send it, to the top of the or then you can send that card to the deck, and that gets shuffled. And I think that's a more effective way because people have been playing card shuffle since a little kid, so they can keep their eye on which card is where at this. Um, these days, sorry, it was something on TV I was looking at. You know, it was something about ice cream, so I just got distracted. But yeah, um, but that's what all the monsters do. Now, of course, the cards that I'm using to weaken my opponent's monster's attack is Dark World Shackles. It the attack and defense of your opponent's monsters becomes 0. I mean, 1,000. They become 100. I am seriously fucking this up. But the attack and defense of your opponent's monsters that get equipped with Dark World, or by the monster, I should say, that gets equipped with Dark World Shackles, its attack and defense becomes 100. It just changes directly to 100. It doesn't reduce it, quote unquote. It doesn't, you know, really do it like that. It just turns it, or just changes it to 100. That's all it does. And during each of your standby phases, if that monster is still face up on the field, then you can inflict 500 damage to your opponent's life points, or 500 damage to the controller of the monster that Dark World Shackles is equipped to. Now, obviously, you wouldn't do this to your own monster. You wouldn't um, equip Dark World Shackles to your own monster. You equip these to your opponent's monsters. So that's the idea that I have with this card being in there. It's really good. Considering that, the attack and defense only becomes 100, this is good for Legacy Hunter as well as Don Zulong and the rest of the Dark Scorpions. This is pretty much like the first card that I put it in this build when I began making the Dark Scorpion build, because I already knew what I was going to do. Now, another card that I have in there is Shrink. It is a quick play card, so it can be activated during your opponent's turn, granted that it was set face down, during your turn. And if it is in your back row, when your opponent's monsters attack, you'll be able to activate it, like during the damage step. And now this is when all of the battle damage gets calculated, and when your life points would, like take a hit, etc., etc., and all that happens. And if you activate it during that time, your opponent's monster's attack will get cut in half. And again, ideal situation, your opponent's monsters would be weakened by this, that they would take the battle damage and their monster would get destroyed, thus activating the effects of the Dark Scorpions. So at least that's the idea right there. Now, Battle Guard Howling was a card that I actually put in there just now. Before, it was Security Orb. Security Orb, it pretty much was the best option before Howling, so it was released. And what it did was that when your opponent's monster declares an attack, you can change the battle position of that monster, which was good for Legacy Hunter, because when it destroys a monster so when it attacks a face down defense position monster, well, I'll take that back because it wouldn't do anything for Legacy Hunter. Mind you, I have not played this deck in months on end, so I'm just now taking a look back at this for like the first time. And but yeah, just omitting that little blur, it changes the battle positions of your opponent's monster that's attacking. So if your opponent's monster is attacking you, then you activate this. It switches them to defense mode and what have you. Or since now they have monsters that can attack while in defense position, this would switch them to face-up attack position, if that would have happened. But also, it had an effect that was pretty useful. Um, when it got destroyed while it was still set in your back row, you can destroy one, or when your opponent destroyed it while it was still set in your back row, um, you could destroy one monster on the field. So this would be good for getting rid of those problematic monsters on your opponent's side, or monsters that you feel are in your way. You know, and considering that like the Dark Scorpions are relatively weak, you know, cards like that aren't a bad idea. But considering everything else that I have going on in here, I just put that in the side deck. Didn't really need it anymore. And I replaced it with Battle Guard Howling, which is pretty damn good for inflicting some burn damage as well as getting rid of your opponent's monsters. As you can see right here, it says when a warrior type monster you control is targeted for an attack or by an opponent's monster effect, target one face-up monster your opponent controls, inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's attack, and if you do, return it to the hand. So not only do you inflict burn damage based on the original attack of that monster that's attacking your Dark Scorpion, which all of them are warrior type monsters, as you can see. All of them are warrior. Even Legacy Hunter. Or if your opponent's monster's effect targets it, you'll be able to do that still. So this is just like the better card between the two, I feel. Considering that you're going for somewhat of a, I don't want to really call it like a beatdown strategy. It's pretty much like a bait and switch strategy. That because of because their attack is so long, you're trying to bait them into attacking your monster. And when that happens, you activate these cards, and you just change it up on them. They think they're going to be able to destroy your monster by battle. You activate Shrink, you activate Battle Guard Howling, as well as other cards in the build, and you get rid of their monsters. While having other things happen. Now, Escape from the Dark Dimension, obviously, it's in there because I kind of made my build to be able to manage from the Banish Zone, considering that I have Allure of Darkness, Dimensional Fissure, as well as Macrocosmos in there. Your monsters are going to get banished, or at least like your dark monsters are going to get banished, and you would want a way to get those dark monsters from the Banish Zone so that you'll be able to use them again. And this will be a great way to do it. So this is some good tech for this build. So again, Dimensional Fissure and Macrocosmos is obviously in there to get rid of your opponent's cards and their monsters. With Allure of the Darkness, you have to banish one dark monster, otherwise you got to discard your entire hand. But in an ideal situation, like you would want to banish your, that one dark monster. That way, later on in the game, when you do get Escape from a Dark Dimension, you'll be able to special summon one of your banished dark attribute monsters. So that was something good to add in there, I felt. Now, Fairy Box, this is like your number one draft pick card, so to speak, when it comes to the Dark Scorpions. Because when this card is activated, when your opponent's monster declares an attack, toss a coin and call it. If you call it right, the attacking monster's attack becomes 0 until the end of the battle phase. During each of your standby phases, of course, you got to pay 500 life points or you got to destroy the card. But still, it is a gamble, yes, but granted that you call it right, you have some pretty, or like you would pretty much do full battle damage from your monsters to your opponent's life points, considering that the attacking monster's attack is going to be 0. As well as activate the effects of the Dark Scorpion. So Fairy Box is an ideal card to have when using the Dark Scorpions. For the fact that you have a chance to weaken your opponent's uh, monsters attack to 0 when they're attacking. That's pretty good. And that's pretty much it. Now, the other cards that I have in the side deck are, Battle Guard Rage. It raises the attack of one of your warrior type monsters by 1,000, which you would think would be good for the archetype, but I feel that 1,000 attack isn't enough when you're looking at the Dark Scorpions, because I mean, when you look at them, like, again, that's only 1,000 attack, so that's like 2,400, 2,400 or like 2,000. You know what I'm saying? Like really, that's not much. The only one that can probably really use it good is maybe, something like Gorg the Strong, because then its attack would be 2,800, which is pretty damn good. But at the same time, it's like Gorg is level 5. Chances are, like, you won't be able to get it on the field as quickly as the other Dark Scorpions and Legacy Hunter. So it's just like, I think I can do better with Battle Guard Howling in the other cards in the build without having to rely on Battle Guard Rage. But it's there just in case people feel like they need to use it. Also, Secret Pass to the Treasures. With this, you can select one face-up monster with an attack of 1,000 points or less on your side of the field, and it would be able to attack your opponent's monsters directly. Now, there's quite a few monsters, in the Dark Scorpions that have 1,000 attack. Chick the Yellow, Burglars, Thorn, and Legacy Hunter. That's 4 monsters in this build that has 1,000 or less attack. And maybe in some creative, silly way, even though you wouldn't want to do it like that, you could equip Dark Shackles to one of your, monsters and reduce its attack down and, change its attack to 100. And then you'll be able to use Secret Pass of the Treasures, but that's kind of like a stupid idea, because I think, obviously, there's a better way for you to use Dark World Shackles. But, that's just like a far-fetched idea that I don't think anybody should use. So, next up is a Monster of the Dark Scorpions. And what this card does is that when you have a face-up Don Zulong on your side of the field, you can special summon as many Dark Scorpion monsters from your hand, but you're only able to do 1 copy each. So, I only added 1 in there. Originally, I had 2, but just looking at it and realizing what the card did and me trying to use it, I discovered that this card is utterly useless. It really is. Like, even in an ideal situation, it wouldn't benefit you as much as you think to have all the Dark Scorpions on the field at once. It really wouldn't. I mean, because really you just have like a bunch of weak monsters on the field at that. And, I mean, yeah, it's field advantage, but I don't know, like, I just never really seen any purpose in having this card in the build. It never really came in handy. It never came in handy at all, really. And I think I was only able to activate it maybe once, and I do mean only once, and it still didn't do anything for me. So I just took one of them out. I left 1 in there. I think that's more than enough because it really does nothing for the build. It really doesn't, or at least it hasn't done anything while I was using the build. And I've won duels with this build before, so in the situations where I won, I didn't need it, and in the situations where I lost, I still didn't need it. And that's kind of like the transition I want to make to the when explaining why there's no extra deck in this build. Now the reason why is because, like, just like I said, there was never a situation where I felt like I needed any cards in the extra deck. Again, when I won the build, or so when I won duels with the build, it was I didn't need any extra deck monsters, and when I lost, I was never in a position where I felt that I needed an extra deck monster in the first place. So if I didn't need them, then what's the purpose of having them in there? And actually, there's a like a few benefits to not having an extra deck. I mean, yeah, like your opponent's gonna think that one, that your deck isn't worth anything, because these days, I mean, like what deck isn't running outside of the Monarchs? What deck isn't running an extra deck? Like, you know what I mean? It's one of those builds that you can trick your opponent into thinking that you like you're running a weak deck, and then they see your monsters, and of course, once they realize that it's a Dark Scorpion, then I'm pretty sure they're going to be more careful when attacking. But still, like in an ideal situation, your opponent isn't going to be intimidated by a deck that does not have an extra deck. So in a way, like there's kind of some mind tricks going on there, and that is important in Yu-Gi-Oh. So like whether some people realize it or not, when you get in your opponent's head even a little bit, you basically have the duel in your favor. That's something that you can only learn from experience, though. But yeah, I never needed an extra deck when I won with this build, because the focus is on the monsters in the main deck anyway, to the point where I don't need an extra deck. Now, of course, you can add monsters in the extra deck. It won't really do anything for you, or like it won't do anything, or even like take away anything, or at least from my experience, it won't. Like I went up against some of today's um, you know, monsters that get used more often, and I didn't really have any trouble getting rid of them using the strategies that I had already had in the build already. So again, an extra deck really isn't needed, but if you feel like you need them, by all means add them. I'm not here to tell you how to, what to do with the build. I'm giving it out there to you guys just to show you that you can take an earlier archetype from Yu-Gi-Oh and just recreate it and make it playable in today's era. So, and here we go with this shit again. And that's pretty much it. So overall, I hope you guys like the build. It's a strategy that involves weakening your opponent's monsters while getting rid of them, or just getting them off the field, as well as activating your Dark Scorpion monster's effect, milling, searching, and getting rid of cards in your opponent's deck. In an ideal situation, you could probably even deck them out, which is really good, as well as banishing your opponent's cards and being able to utilize the cards that banish your opponent's cards to your advantage as well, with Escape from a Dark Dimension, and inflict burn damage to your opponent as well as get him off the field. You have enough in this main deck to where you don't need an extra deck. Like, the build is pretty much that self-sufficient. Now, this is to be noted, there's only one reinforcements on an army in the build right now, but after July 14th, which was next week on what, Tuesday? No, on Monday. Next week on Monday, the new limited and forbidden list goes into effect. And one of the changes that are coming to this new format is that reinforcements of the army will be set to 2. Now, this is good for the Dark Scorpions because, of course, you'll be able to, search out more monsters. Like more warrior type monsters in the build. That gives you more options, and you can probably get rid of this mustering of the Dark Scorpions, because that, again, the card doesn't do shit at all. So this will be pretty good. So that's one change that I just felt that I needed to speak on, and I'm probably going to do that when the card does get semi-limited. And yeah, so Again, thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoy the video. Hope you guys enjoyed the Dark Scorpion build. And I'm glad I actually did this first, because next week, the build that I'm going to be featuring in Retro Modernization is actually going to be using the same, or like somewhat the same ideas as I had in this build. So it's kind of taking some of those or these same concepts and kind of bringing it to that other build that I'm going to be featuring next week. So yeah, hope you guys enjoy the build. Peace, and I'll see you guys next week for another Retro Modernization.